My wife looked at me like I was a stranger the night I came home. She was standing barefoot in our kitchen in Cedar Rapids, holding a coffee mug with both hands because they wouldn't stop shaking. I dropped my duffel bag by the door and said, "Elaine, what the hell happened to you?" And she flinched so hard she nearly dropped the mug. My own son walked into the room 2 seconds later and said, "Dad, don't start," before I'd even raised my voice. That was the moment I knew something inside my family had broken while I was gone. The woman I'd been married to for 43 years had lost 17 pounds in less than a month. The pantry was almost empty, and nobody would look me in the eye. Then, at almost 2 in the morning that same night, I heard footsteps upstairs, even though my son swore nobody else had been in my house. And when I finally checked the security footage 3 days later, I discovered someone had been sneaking into my home after midnight while my wife cried herself to sleep. If this story speaks to your heart, or if you've ever felt betrayed by people you trusted most, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from tonight and what your local time is right now. I always read the comments before bed. My name is Rick Lawson. I'm 71 years old, and this is the story about the month my family almost destroyed itself without me even realizing it. Looking back now, I think the first sign was probably the silence. I'd spent 27 days hauling freight between Iowa and North Dakota, sleeping in truck stop parking lots, and eating diner eggs at 4 in the morning just to keep money coming into the house. By the time I finally pulled my Ford F-150 into our driveway that Thursday evening, all I wanted was a hot meal, a shower, and to sit beside my wife on the couch like we always did. Usually Elaine would meet me at the door smiling before I even killed the engine. Not this time. The porch light was off. The curtains were shut tight, and when I walked inside, the house smelled stale, like nobody had cooked in days. "Elaine," I called out. My voice echoed through the hallway. She stepped into the kitchen slowly, almost nervously, wiping her hands on an old dish towel. For a second, I honestly didn't recognize her. Her cheeks looked hollow. Her pajama pants hung loose around her waist. Even her wedding ring looked too big for her hand now. I stared at her and said, "Jesus Christ, honey, are you sick?" She forced a smile so fake it hurt to look at. "I'm okay, Rick. Just tired." I walked closer and touched her arm gently. She felt lighter somehow. "Fragile. You lost weight." I said I'm fine, but her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Then I noticed something else. There was a faint yellow bruise near her wrist. Small, easy to miss. My stomach tightened immediately. "What happened to your arm?" Before she could answer, I heard footsteps coming downstairs. Daniel. My son looked surprised to see me standing there, even though he knew exactly what day I was getting home. "Dad," he said flatly. No smile. No hug. Nothing. "What's going on here?" I asked. "Nothing," he answered too fast. "Mom's just stressed." I looked back at Elaine. She wouldn't even raise her head anymore. 17 pounds doesn't come from stress, I said quietly. Daniel sighed hard like I was the problem. "Can you not do this tonight?" That sentence hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent my entire adult life breaking my back for that family. Missed birthdays. Missed anniversaries. Drove through blizzards and thunderstorms so my kids could go to college and never worry about bills. And now my son was looking at me like I was some inconvenience standing in my own kitchen. Dinner that night felt wrong from the second we sat down. Elaine barely touched her soup. Daniel kept checking his phone every few minutes. At one point I asked, "Has somebody been coming by the house while I've been gone?" Elaine froze completely. Daniel answered instead. "No, too quick again." I leaned back slowly in my chair. "Then why's the back door deadbolt scratched up?" Neither of them answered. The room went dead silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. A few minutes later, Daniel grabbed his keys and stood up abruptly. "I should go." "You just got here," I said. "Yeah, well, Melissa's waiting for me." He walked out without even looking at his mother. Elaine watched him leave with tears building in her eyes. "Elaine," I said softly after the front door shut, "tell me what's happening." She stared down into her soup for a long time before whispering, "Rick, please don't start digging into things tonight." That sentence sat in my chest like ice. Because people only say that when there's something they're terrified you'll find. Around 1:30 that morning, I woke up thirsty and walked into the hallway. The house was dark except for the faint light above the stove downstairs. Then I heard it. A floorboard creaking upstairs. Slow footsteps. I stopped cold. Elaine was asleep beside me. Daniel had gone home hours ago, which meant somebody else was inside my house. I stood frozen in that hallway for several seconds listening to those footsteps above me, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. The house was old. Floorboards creaked all the time. But deep down, I knew the difference between a settling house and somebody slowly moving across the second floor at almost 2 in the morning. "Elaine," I whispered, shaking her shoulder gently. She woke up startled. "What? Did you hear that?" Her face changed immediately. Not confusion. Fear. Real fear. She grabbed my wrist hard enough to surprise me. "Rick," she whispered, "do not go upstairs right now." That sentence hit me harder than the sound itself. I stared at her in the dark. "Why would you say that?" "Please," she said quietly, almost trembling now. "Just wait until morning." I wish I could explain how strange it felt hearing my wife talk to me that way. Elaine had always been the calm one in our family. 43 years together, and I had never seen her afraid of someone inside our own home. I sat there listening for another sound, but after a minute, everything went silent again. Eventually, I laid back down, but sleep never came. My mind kept replaying every odd thing I had noticed since walking through that front door. The empty refrigerator. The way Daniel answered questions for his mother before she could speak. The bruising on her wrist. The panic in her eyes every time I mentioned the house. Around 6 that morning, I finally gave up trying to sleep and went downstairs to make coffee. The kitchen window above the sink overlooked our backyard and detached garage. Normally, Elaine kept bird feeders hanging outside because she loved cardinals. That morning, the feeders were empty. Dead empty. That bothered me more than it should have. My wife never forgot those birds. Ever. A few minutes later, she shuffled into the kitchen wearing an oversized gray sweatshirt that looked like it belonged to somebody else now. "You should eat something," I told her gently. "I am not hungry." "Elaine, you barely touched dinner." I said I am fine. Her voice snapped sharper this time, then softened immediately. "Sorry, I just have not been sleeping much." I poured coffee into her favorite mug with the little painted sunflowers on the side. "Has Daniel been helping you while I was gone?" She hesitated too long. Sometimes. Before she could answer, we heard a truck pull into the driveway. Daniel again. 7 in the morning. He walked into the kitchen, already tense. "Dad, you are up early." "Funny," I said. "I was about to say the same thing to you." He ignored that and opened the refrigerator. I watched him carefully. He knew exactly where everything was without looking. He moved through the kitchen like somebody who had been there every day. "You staying for breakfast?" I asked. "No. Melissa wants me back home." Then he glanced toward his mother. "Did you take your pills?" Elaine nodded quietly. Something about that exchange rubbed me wrong immediately. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the tone. Daniel sounded less like a son and more like somebody managing a situation. "What pills?" I asked. Daniel answered before Elaine could. "Her anxiety medication." "Since when does she have anxiety medication?" Silence again. My son rubbed the back of his neck impatiently. "Dad, can we not do 20 questions this early?" I looked at him carefully across that kitchen table and suddenly remembered something from years ago. Daniel had always hated when people dug too deeply into things. Even as a kid. When he was 14, he crashed my riding mower into our neighbor's mailbox and convinced his younger sister to take the blame because he knew Elaine would protect him. Another time, he maxed out Elaine's emergency credit card in college and let us think the bank had made an error for almost 3 months. Every time there was trouble, Daniel's first instinct was never honesty. It was concealment. Elaine used to say, "He means well, Rick. He just panics." Maybe she was right back then. But standing there that morning watching my grown son control every conversation around my wife, I felt something colder settling into my stomach. Before leaving, Daniel walked toward the hallway closet where we kept spare keys and winter gloves. He stopped when he noticed me watching him. "What?" he asked defensively. "Nothing," I said slowly. "Just wondering why you still need a house key when your mother's always home." His jaw tightened immediately. "Seriously?" It was a simple question. Elaine suddenly stood up too fast from the table. "Rick, please." Her voice cracked again. Daniel grabbed his jacket. "I have got to go." Then he looked directly at his mother and said quietly, "Call me if he starts going through things." The second those words left his mouth, the air in that kitchen changed completely. Because that was not something you say unless there is something hidden inside the house you are terrified someone might find. After Daniel left that morning, I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee getting cold in my hand, while Elaine quietly rinsed dishes that were already clean. Neither of us said anything for almost 10 minutes. That was unusual for us. Elaine used to fill silence with little stories about neighbors, grocery prices, or birds in the backyard. Now she moved around the kitchen like somebody afraid of making noise. Finally, I turned around and asked, "How long has this been going on?" She kept her back to me. "What? Whatever this is." Her shoulders tightened immediately. "Rick, please let it go." "No." The word came out sharper than I expected. Usually I backed down when Elaine got uncomfortable. For 40 years I had avoided conflict inside this house because I was gone so much for work. If Daniel screwed up, I let Elaine handle it. If there was tension, I stayed quiet. But standing there looking at my wife slowly disappearing in front of me, something inside me refused to step aside this time. She turned around slowly with tears building again. "You do not understand." "Then help me understand." Before she could answer, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen and immediately muted it face down. That tiny movement told me more than any explanation could have. "Was that Daniel?" I asked. "It does not matter." "It matters to me." She wiped her eyes quickly. "You have been home less than 24 hours, Rick. And my wife looks like she has been carrying a funeral on her shoulders for a month." She walked out of the kitchen after that without another word. Around noon, I decided to drive into town for groceries. The refrigerator bothered me too much. While loading bags into my truck outside Hy-Vee, I heard someone call my name. "Rick Lawson." I turned around and saw Martha Pierce from 3 houses down. She had lived on our street almost 20 years and knew everybody's business before the mailman did. "Martha," I said politely. "Been a while." Her expression shifted awkwardly. "I heard you were finally home." Something about the way she said finally caught my attention. "Yeah, got back Thursday night." She hesitated. "Your poor wife has had a rough few weeks." I leaned against the truck slowly. "What do you mean?" Martha lowered her voice immediately. "I probably should not say anything." "Martha," she sighed. "There were arguments at your house while you were gone. Loud ones. Mostly late at night." My stomach tightened. "Arguments between who?" "I only ever saw your son's truck outside." Then she added quietly, "Your wife looked frightened the last time I spoke to her." I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. "Did Elaine say anything to you?" "No. But honestly, Rick." Martha looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Something felt off. I drove home gripping the steering wheel harder than I realized. Every mile back to the house, pieces started clicking together in my head. Daniel constantly checking on Elaine. The missing food. The anxiety medication. The hidden fear every time I asked questions. But what I could not understand was why. Daniel had never been perfect, but he was not cruel. At least that was what I had believed most of his life. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed another vehicle parked near the garage. Melissa's white SUV. The second I walked inside, the conversation in the living room stopped cold. Melissa stood up quickly holding paperwork against her chest. "Oh," she said too brightly. "You are back already." Already? Like I was interrupting something. Elaine was sitting stiffly on the couch looking exhausted. Melissa smiled at me in that fake polite way she always used whenever she wanted something. "We were just helping your wife organize some documents." I looked at the papers. "What kind of documents?" "Medical paperwork," Melissa answered immediately. Too immediately. Then Daniel stepped out from the hallway carrying a small lockbox from our bedroom closet. I stared at it. "Why do you have that?" Daniel froze. For 1 second nobody spoke. Then Melissa jumped in fast. "Elaine asked us to help sort through important things in case of emergencies." I looked directly at my wife. "Did you?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Daniel suddenly snapped. "Dad, not everything is about you." The room went dead silent after that. Even Melissa looked shocked he had said it out loud. I stared at my son standing there holding my lockbox in his hands, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger inside my own family. Then I noticed something else. The lockbox was already open. I stared at that open lockbox in Daniel's hands and felt something heavy settle into my chest. That box held every important thing Elaine and I had built together over 4 decades. Insurance papers, property records, bank information, copies of our wills. We kept it locked in the bedroom closet behind old blankets because nobody besides family even knew it existed. "Why is that open?" I asked quietly. Daniel immediately shut the lid too fast. "Mom wanted help organizing." "Paperwork." I looked at Elaine again. She was pale now. Melissa stepped forward before Elaine could answer. Rick, you are making this into something bigger than it is. Then explain it to me. Melissa crossed her arms tightly. Elaine has been overwhelmed while you have been gone. We have been trying to help her manage things around the house. Manage things. I hated the sound of that word. My wife has managed this house just fine for 43 years. Daniel exhaled sharply like he was losing patience with a child. Dad, Mom cannot handle stress the same way anymore. That hit me wrong immediately. Not just because of the words, but because Elaine lowered her eyes the second he said them. Like she had already heard that speech too many times before. I stepped toward the couch slowly. Elaine, do you want them handling your finances? Her fingers twisted nervously together in her lap. I just needed some help while you were away. Melissa jumped in again. Exactly. Then she smiled at me with that fake calm expression. You have been gone almost a month, Rick. Somebody had to step in. I felt my face grow hot. I had spent nearly 30 years driving freight across half this country to provide for my family, and now my daughter-in-law was talking to me like I was some absent stranger. Step in for what exactly? I asked. Daniel suddenly snapped the lockbox shut hard enough to make Elaine flinch. For everything. The room went silent again. Then he added, you are not here most of the time. There it was. The resentment underneath everything. Not concern. Not help. Resentment. I looked at my son standing in my living room and suddenly remembered every time Elaine had covered for him growing up. Every missed payment. Every bad decision. Every excuse. Daniel had been laid off twice in 5 years. Melissa quit jobs constantly because every boss was supposedly disrespectful. 3 years ago, I quietly paid their mortgage for 4 months after Daniel gambled away part of their savings on some online investment nonsense he never admitted to anyone else. I did not even tell Elaine the full amount because I was embarrassed for him. And now somehow I was being treated like the outsider. Melissa sat down beside Elaine and gently touched her shoulder. Tell him you have been struggling. Elaine looked trapped between all of us. Things have been difficult lately. What things? I asked softly. Bills. Health. What? She opened her mouth, but Daniel cut in again. Mom has panic attacks now. I turned toward him slowly. Since when? Since she started dealing with everything alone. The accusation underneath that sentence landed exactly how he intended. For years I carried guilt about missing family moments because of work. Daniel knew that. He was weaponizing it now. I looked at Elaine carefully. Did a doctor diagnose these panic attacks? Before she could answer, Melissa stood up abruptly. Honestly, Rick, this interrogation is not helping her. Interrogation? I repeated. I came home to find my wife terrified in her own house. Daniel stepped closer now. You are upsetting her. No, I said quietly. Something else upset her before I ever walked through that door. For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely nervous. Not angry. Nervous. His eyes flicked toward the hallway for half a second. It was quick, but I caught it. Then Melissa immediately said, we should leave. Too fast again. Too coordinated. My instincts started screaming at me that these conversations had happened before. Maybe many times before. I watched Daniel carry the lockbox toward the hallway closet instead of back to my bedroom. Wrong closet, I said. He froze. Another silence. Then he forced a laugh that sounded painfully fake. Right. Sorry. He corrected himself and disappeared down the hall. The second he was out of sight, Elaine suddenly whispered, Rick, please stop pushing this. Her eyes looked glassy with panic now. Why? I asked. Because you do not know what he is capable of when he feels cornered. Those words hit me like cold water. My own wife had just warned me about our son. Then from down the hallway, I heard something I will never forget for the rest of my life. The sound of a key turning inside our bedroom desk drawer. The sound of that key turning inside my desk drawer made my blood run cold because there was only one thing inside that drawer Daniel would care about. Our financial folders. Retirement information. Property documents. I walked down the hallway fast enough that Melissa suddenly stood up behind me and said, Rick, wait. I ignored her. When I reached the bedroom, Daniel was already kneeling beside the desk with papers spread across the bed. He looked up immediately like a teenager caught doing something he knew was wrong. What exactly are you looking for? I asked. Nothing. That drawer contains our private records. He stood up too quickly. Mom asked me to help organize things. Then why are you searching through my side of the desk? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out this time. Melissa appeared in the doorway with that same tight fake smile, she always wore when she wanted control of a situation. Everybody needs to calm down. I looked directly at Elaine behind her. Did you ask them to go through my desk? Elaine looked exhausted, defeated. I just thought maybe we should prepare for the future. Future. Another word that suddenly sounded dangerous. I picked up one of the papers from the bed and immediately recognized the form. Durable power of attorney paperwork. My chest tightened. Why is this here? Melissa answered instantly. That was my idea. Of course it was. It is just precautionary, she continued smoothly. At your age, these things matter. At your age, I had spent years helping Daniel and Melissa recover from one financial disaster after another, and now they were discussing me like I was already halfway gone. Nobody touches this paperwork again, I said firmly. Daniel rolled his eyes hard enough to make my stomach turn. Dad, this is exactly why Mom has been stressed out. Excuse me. Everything has to be your way. I stared at him in disbelief. I have been home 2 days. Exactly, he shot back. You disappear for weeks, then come back acting like you know everything happening here. Elaine suddenly whispered, please stop arguing. But nobody listened anymore. Melissa crossed her arms. Elaine needs stability. Elaine needs sleep and proper meals, I replied. Not secret paperwork. That was the wrong thing to say. Daniel's entire expression changed instantly. You think we are trying to steal something? Nobody answered for a second, because the truth was, the thought had already entered my mind. Melissa laughed softly, but there was no warmth in it. That is honestly insulting. Then she looked at Elaine and said, see, this is what I warned you about. Warned you about. My own daughter-in-law was planting ideas in my wife's head about me inside my own home. The realization made me feel physically sick. Over the next 3 days, things somehow got worse. Every attempt I made to fix the tension only seemed to deepen it. I tried talking calmly with Daniel over the phone Tuesday morning. Son, whatever is happening here, we can work through it. Long silence. Then, you are making Mom worse. Click. He hung up on me. Wednesday, I sent him a text apologizing for raising my voice. No response. Thursday morning, I wrote him an actual email because I did not know what else to do anymore. I told him I loved him. Told him I wanted us acting like family again. 3 hours later, Melissa replied from his account instead. Daniel needs space right now. Not even signed with his name. That same afternoon, I found Elaine crying quietly at the kitchen table holding unpaid medical bills I had never seen before. Why did you not tell me about these? I asked. She immediately tried hiding them under a magazine. It is handled. By who? She looked away again. Daniel has been helping. Helping. Every answer led back to him. Every conversation ended with fear or silence. Even neighbors started acting strange around me. One afternoon, old Mr. Hanley from across the street stopped me while I was getting the mail and awkwardly asked, everything okay over there? Why? I asked carefully. He hesitated. Your son told people your wife has been struggling mentally lately. I felt like somebody punched me in the stomach. They were building a narrative around her. Around me. Quietly. Systematically. Suddenly, the anxiety medication made sense. The paperwork made sense. The late-night visits made sense. They were convincing everyone Elaine could not manage things on her own anymore. And maybe they were. Trying to convince her too. That night, I sat alone in the living room listening to the refrigerator hum, while Elaine slept upstairs behind a locked bedroom door for the first time in our marriage. Around midnight, my phone lit up with a security notification from the backyard camera system I had forgotten was still connected to my old tablet. Motion detected. Rear entrance. 2:13 a.m. I stared at the security notification on my tablet for almost 10 seconds before I finally opened the camera app. My hands felt strangely numb. The backyard camera feed loaded slowly, grainy at first, then sharpened into the familiar view of our back porch under the motion light. Empty. Then movement. A person stepped into frame wearing a dark sweatshirt and baseball cap pulled low. They walked directly toward the back door without hesitation. No knocking. No confusion. Whoever it was already knew the code to our house. My stomach tightened as I watched the timestamp. 2:13 a.m. The figure disappeared inside. 2 minutes later, another notification appeared. Camera disconnected. I sat there frozen in the dark living room listening to the refrigerator hum while something inside me finally clicked into place. This was not random tension anymore. This was organized. Intentional. Somebody had been entering my home late at night while I was gone, and somebody inside my family knew exactly who it was. I barely slept. The next morning, Elaine came downstairs looking even more exhausted than usual. There were deep shadows under her eyes now. She moved carefully, like her body was carrying weight nobody else could see. I placed the tablet on the kitchen table. Who came into this house last night? She stopped walking immediately. What? The camera caught somebody entering through the back door at 2:13 in the morning. Her face lost all color. Rick, who was it? She sat down slowly without answering. I could see tears building already. I cannot do this anymore, she whispered. Do what? Pretend everything is normal. That sentence hurt worse than shouting would have. I sat across from her quietly. Then tell me the truth. She covered her face with both hands. I was trying to keep this family together by hiding things from me. You do not understand how bad things got while you were gone. Her voice sounded small now, defeated. Then help me understand. She shook her head slowly. Daniel said if I told you everything, it would destroy the family. I leaned back in my chair staring at the woman I had loved since 1979 and realized she looked terrified of her own son. Not angry, not frustrated, terrified. Around noon, I drove out to Miller Freight where I had worked on and off for years whenever I was between long hauls. My dispatcher, Frank, took one look at me and said, "You look like hell." Feel worse, I admitted. We sat in the break room drinking burnt coffee while truckers came and went around us. For the first time in years, I told somebody what was happening inside my house. Frank listened quietly without interrupting. When I finally finished, he rubbed his jaw slowly and said, "Rick, you ever think maybe they are trying to push you out?" The words landed like a brick in my chest because deep down, I already had. "That is my son," I said weakly. Frank looked at me carefully. Sometimes family convinces themselves they deserve things before the person is even gone. I drove home in silence after that. Every memory suddenly felt different. Every conversation replayed in a darker way. The paperwork, the anxiety medication, the neighbors hearing arguments, the stories spreading around town about Elaine struggling mentally. They were building a case around her, around us. By the time I pulled into the driveway, Melissa's SUV was already there again. Through the front window, I could see Daniel pacing inside the living room while Elaine sat stiffly on the couch. Nobody noticed me at first. Then I heard Daniel say something that made me stop cold outside the front door. "If Dad keeps digging into this, everything falls apart." Melissa answered quietly. "Then maybe it is time to stop treating him like he still controls everything." I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, realizing something painful for the first time. My family was not trying to protect me from the truth. They were trying to protect the truth from me. And somehow, without noticing it happen, I had already become the outsider in my own home. That night, I did not sleep in the bedroom. Elaine locked herself upstairs again, and Daniel stopped answering my calls completely. I sat alone in the dark den listening to the old grandfather clock tick past midnight, while the house around me felt colder than it ever had before. But sometime around 3 in the morning, after hours of staring at the ceiling, I finally made a decision. I was done asking people to tell me the truth. From that moment on, I was going to find it myself. The next morning, I drove straight to Cedar Ridge Electronics before the store even officially opened. The security system for our house had been installed almost 8 years earlier by a guy named Leon Becker, retired Marine, quiet man, knew cameras better than anybody in Lynn County. When he unlocked the front door and saw me standing outside with my tablet in hand, he frowned immediately. "Rick, you all right?" "Not really." He let me inside without another question. We sat at a folding table near the repair counter while I showed him the disconnected footage from the backyard camera. Leon watched the screen twice without speaking. Then he leaned back slowly and said, "This was manually cut." Meaning somebody shut down the feed on purpose after entering the house. I felt my jaw tighten. Can deleted footage be recovered? Depends how smart the person deleting it was. He glanced at me carefully. "You think this is family?" I stared at the grainy, paused image of the dark figure on the screen. I do not know what to think anymore. Leon spent almost 2 hours pulling files from the camera backup system while I sat there drinking burnt vending machine coffee and trying not to imagine my own son sneaking around my property after midnight. Around noon, he finally looked up and said, "Well, whoever it was used the correct access code." My stomach dropped. So they belonged there. Or somebody gave them access. On the drive home, I stopped by the bank for the first time in months. Normally, Elaine handled small household things while I handled long-term finances. That had always worked for us. But now nothing felt stable anymore. The woman at the front desk recognized me immediately. "Mr. Lawson, welcome back. I need copies of recent account activity." Her smile faded slightly. Of course. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a tiny office flipping through statements I had never seen before. Several large withdrawals. Repeated transfers. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to make my chest tighten. Melissa's name appeared multiple times connected to online reimbursement notes. Medical support. Household support. Emergency assistance. Thousands of dollars over just a few weeks. Who authorized these? I asked quietly. The bank employee adjusted her glasses. Most appear to have been approved through your joint household access. Elaine. Or somebody pressuring Elaine. I folded the statements carefully and drove home without turning on the radio. The house was empty when I arrived. For the first time in days, the silence actually felt peaceful. I walked slowly through the kitchen, then the hallway, then finally into the bedroom. Elaine had not locked the door this time. That alone told me she was exhausted. On her nightstand sat a small spiral notebook I had never seen before. I almost left it alone. Almost. But something inside me already knew secrets were hiding in plain sight all over this house now. The notebook contained grocery lists at first, prescription reminders, appointment dates. Then halfway through, the handwriting changed. Smaller, shakier. One sentence caught my attention immediately. "Daniel says Dad will not understand." A few pages later, "Melissa says we need protection before Rick makes another decision." Another entry 3 days later. "I do not want to sign anything else." I sat on the edge of the bed staring at those words while the afternoon light came through the curtains. Not anger. Not yet. Mostly grief. Because I finally understood what had happened while I was away working all those weeks. They had slowly surrounded Elaine. Conversations. Pressure. Paperwork. Constant visits. Telling her she was overwhelmed. Telling her I was absent. Telling her they knew better. And somewhere inside all that noise, my wife had started losing confidence in her own judgment. Around 6 that evening, Elaine finally came home carrying 2 small grocery bags by herself. When she saw me sitting quietly in the bedroom, she stopped. "You found the notebook." It was not a question. I nodded once. She looked tired beyond words. I stood up slowly and took the grocery bags from her hands without saying anything. Then I unpacked them while she sat silently at the kitchen table. Soup cans, crackers, tea, barely enough food for 2 people. After a long silence, I finally asked, "When was the last time you felt safe in this house?" Elaine stared at the table for several seconds before whispering, "I do not remember anymore." I sat beside her quietly after that. No arguing, no accusations, just silence. The kind married people understand after decades together. Then she reached into her sweater pocket with trembling fingers and slid a folded piece of paper across the table toward me. "I found this in Daniel's jacket last week," she whispered. "I do not think they know I saw it." I unfolded the paper slowly. At the top was the name of a local elder care attorney, and beneath it, already partially filled out in blue ink, were the words, "Petition for Cognitive Evaluation." The next morning, I put on my old Miller Freight work jacket for the first time in almost a year. Navy blue canvas. My name stitched above the chest pocket in faded white thread. Rick Lawson. I stood in front of the hallway mirror longer than I expected just looking at it. Funny how a simple jacket can remind you who you used to be before everything inside your own home started making you doubt yourself. Elaine came downstairs slowly while I was pouring coffee. She looked at the jacket, then at me. "You heading out?" "Yeah." "Where?" I picked up my keys. To stop sitting around feeling sorry for myself. For the first time in weeks, I saw the corner of her mouth almost smile. Not fully, but close. That mattered more than she probably realized. Miller Freight had recently lost 2 senior dispatch supervisors after a corporate merger shuffled management around. Frank told me about it during one of our coffee breaks, but at the time I barely listened because my head was drowning in family problems. Now suddenly the idea felt different. Familiar. Steady. Real. When I walked through those office doors that morning, the smell of diesel fuel and old coffee hit me like memory itself. Men nodded at me from loading bays. Forklifts beeped in the distance. Radios crackled overhead. Normal life. Frank spotted me near dispatch and laughed quietly. "Well, look who decided to rejoin civilization." "Do not get emotional about it," I said. He tossed me a clipboard. "Too late." By lunchtime, I was already helping reroute delayed shipments after a storm line moved through Iowa overnight. 3 younger dispatchers crowded around my desk while I traced routes across a weather map with a black marker. If truck 17 cuts south through Cedar Rapids, he saves 2 hours minimum, I explained. One of the younger guys blinked at me. How did you figure that out so fast? I shrugged. 30 years on the road. The truth was, I had forgotten what competence felt like. At home lately, every conversation made me feel old, confused, or in the way. But here people listen when I spoke. They trusted me. Around 4 that afternoon, the regional manager himself came downstairs from the second-floor offices. Gary Mendez. Tough guy? Former driver. Not somebody who complimented people casually. He stopped beside my desk, watching me reorganize delivery schedules. Frank says you fixed half our routing mess in one day. Only because your software is terrible, I replied. He laughed hard at that. You interested in consulting part-time? I looked up slowly. You serious? Dead serious. He pointed toward my old jacket. Half these kids in here know your name already. Apparently you used to keep this place running before I got hired. I had not heard respect in someone's voice directed at me in a very long time. That evening, Gary handed me a temporary supervisor badge clipped to a retractable cord. Nothing fancy. White plastic. My picture looked terrible, but seeing my name beside the word operations felt strangely emotional after everything that had happened at home. On the drive back, I stopped at a diner outside Marion and ate a real meal for the first time in days. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, black coffee. The waitress kept calling me Han, while country music played softly near the kitchen. Nobody there knew anything about my family. Nobody looked at me with suspicion or pity. I sat there realizing how small my world had become without me noticing. When I finally got home after dark, the house looked different somehow. Not warmer exactly, but less suffocating. Elaine was sitting at the kitchen table reading quietly. She looked up when I walked in and immediately noticed the badge clipped to my jacket pocket. What is that? She asked softly. I unclipped it and set it on the table beside her tea mug. She picked it up carefully. Operations Supervisor, she read aloud. Then she looked at me for several seconds without speaking. I have not seen you stand this straight in years. That sentence stayed with me the rest of the night. Later, after Elaine went upstairs, I sat alone in the den reviewing the copied bank statements again beside the elder care paperwork she had found hidden in Daniel's jacket. But this time something inside me felt different. Clearer. Stronger. Not because the problems disappeared. They had not. The lies were still there. The missing money was still there. The late-night visits were still unexplained. But for the first time since coming home, I no longer felt like a confused old man trapped inside somebody else's story. I felt like myself again. Then, just before midnight, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. One sentence. No name attached. You need to check what was uploaded from Daniel's laptop 3 weeks ago. The message from the unknown number sat on my phone screen almost the entire night. I read it over and over while the grandfather clock in the den ticked past midnight. You need to check what was uploaded from Daniel's laptop 3 weeks ago. No signature. No explanation. Just that sentence. By morning, I already knew who I needed to call. Leon Becker answered on the second ring. You sound awake, I said. Former Marines do not sleep. What happened? 20 minutes later, I was back inside Cedar Ridge Electronics while rain tapped softly against the storefront windows. Leon adjusted his glasses as I handed him my phone. He read the message once, then looked up slowly. You think your son uploaded files somewhere? I think my son has been preparing something behind my back. Leon nodded toward the repair bench. Bring me the old tablet from your camera system and anything else connected to the house network. I drove home carefully through the rain, feeling strangely calm for the first time in weeks. Not because things were getting better. They were not. But because the balance had started shifting. Before, everybody else knew something I did not. Now little pieces were finally moving into place. When I walked inside the house, Elaine was sitting quietly near the living room window wrapped in a blanket despite it being June. She looked tired but steadier than before. Where are you going? She asked softly when she saw me collecting electronics from the den cabinet. To get answers. She watched me unplug the old backup hard drive from the security system. Rick, I looked at her. Did Daniel ever use your computer while I was away? Her fingers tightened around the blanket immediately. A few times. For what? He said he was helping organize bills and medical records. There it was again. Helping. Always helping. I nodded slowly. Did he ever mention lawyers? She hesitated too long. Melissa did. I crouched beside her chair carefully. Elaine, listen to me. Whatever they told you these past few weeks, you are not confused. You are not incapable. And nobody gets to decide your future except you. Her eyes filled with tears almost immediately. They kept saying you would not understand. Understand what? She looked away toward the rain outside the window. That they thought we needed someone else managing things now. The words landed quietly, but they cut deeper than shouting ever could have. Around noon, Leon finally called me back. You should come see this in person. His voice sounded different. Tighter. I drove straight there without even finishing lunch. When I arrived, Leon already had files pulled up across 2 monitors behind the repair counter. Your son backed up documents from the home network to a cloud storage account 3 weeks ago, he explained. Medical records, bank statements, insurance paperwork, property information. My stomach tightened. Can you tell where they were sent? Leon clicked through several folders silently. Not directly, but there is another thing. He opened a scanned PDF on the screen. My chest went cold immediately. At the top of the document was Elaine's full name beside the words Preliminary Cognitive Concern Assessment. What the hell is that? I whispered. Leon leaned back slowly. Looks like somebody started building documentation to question your wife's mental competency. I stared at the screen while my heartbeat thudded hard in my ears. Elaine had not been losing confidence naturally. They had been feeding it to her, repeating it, reinforcing it. Paperwork, medication, isolation, quiet pressure over weeks. Suddenly, every strange conversation made sense in a completely different way. Then Leon clicked another folder. There is more. Inside were draft emails, notes, appointment confirmations with an elder care attorney downtown. One unfinished message stopped me cold. Given Mr. Lawson's extended absences for trucking work, we believe Mrs. Lawson may require supervised financial management moving forward. I sat down heavily in the chair beside the desk. They were building a case. Leon nodded once. Looks that way. I rubbed both hands over my face, trying to steady my breathing. Can they actually do something like this? Not without evaluations and legal process, Leon said carefully. But if your wife signed enough paperwork while pressured, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. My phone suddenly buzzed in my pocket. Daniel. First time he had called me in days. I stared at the screen while it rang. Leon looked at me quietly. You going to answer? I let it ring twice more before finally pressing accept. Dad. Daniel said immediately, his voice tense. Where are you? For the first time since this nightmare started, I did not feel cornered anymore. I looked directly at the documents on Leon's monitor and answered calmly. Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing. Then there was a long silence on the other end of the line before Daniel finally said, very quietly, You were not supposed to find those files. Daniel asked to meet that same evening. Not at the house. Not over the phone. He wanted to meet at a small diner off Highway 151 about 20 minutes outside Cedar Rapids. The kind of place truckers stop for meatloaf and black coffee after midnight runs. I arrived early and took a booth near the back window where I could see the parking lot. Rain still tapped softly against the glass. Daniel walked in 7 minutes late wearing a gray hoodie and baseball cap pulled low like he did not want to be recognized. The second he sat down across from me, I realized something important. He looked exhausted. Not angry. Not confident. Exhausted. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he said quietly, You went through my laptop. No, I answered calmly. You uploaded legal files from my house. His jaw tightened immediately. You were not supposed to find those. I know. The waitress appeared with coffee menus, but neither of us touched them. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face slowly. Dad, this got bigger than we planned. Planned. Hearing that word out loud did something to me. Not rage. Something colder. Who is we? I asked. He looked toward the rain outside before answering. Melissa mostly. But you helped. Long silence. Then finally, yeah. I leaned back against the booth studying my son carefully. He looked older than 40 now. Nervous. Hollow around the eyes. Tell me something honestly, I said quietly. Did you ever intend to tell me what you were doing? He swallowed hard, but never answered. That silence told me everything. A few minutes later, Melissa arrived unexpectedly. She walked into the diner quickly, spotted us, then slid into the booth beside Daniel like she already knew the conversation was going badly. We need to clear some things up, she said immediately. I almost laughed at how rehearsed she sounded. Please do. Melissa folded her hands together carefully. Nobody was trying to hurt Elaine. Then why was she afraid inside her own house? Because she has been overwhelmed. For months. Overwhelmed enough to sign control of her finances away. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her. Melissa stayed calm. Too calm. Rick, somebody needed to think practically. About what? About the future. There was that word again. Future. I stared at both of them sitting across from me, while waitresses moved quietly around the diner, carrying plates nobody at our table intended to order. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting inside my chest for days. Did you actually believe your mother was mentally incapable? Neither answered immediately. Melissa finally spoke first. We thought she was vulnerable. To who? Silence again. Then Daniel finally muttered, Dad? I held up one hand gently. No. I want to hear this clearly. Daniel stared down at the table for several long seconds before finally saying the words that changed everything. Mom said she was scared you would leave her with nothing if something happened to you on the road. I blinked slowly. What? He finally looked up at me. You were gone all the time. You never talked about retirement. Never talked about legal plans. Melissa thought if something happened to you unexpectedly, everything would become a mess. I sat there quietly absorbing that. Because beneath all the manipulation and secrecy was something uglier. They had convinced themselves they were justified. So instead of talking to me, I said carefully, you started building legal paperwork behind my back? Melissa leaned forward slightly. We were trying to protect her. From me. From uncertainty. I shook my head slowly. No. You were trying to control her before I even had a chance to defend myself. Daniel suddenly looked miserable. It was not supposed to go this far. Then why continue? Another silence. Then Melissa answered with brutal honesty for the first time all night. Because once the paperwork started, we could not stop. Nobody spoke after that. Rain tapped softly against the diner windows while old country music played near the kitchen. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a folded sheet of paper onto the table between us. Daniel frowned. What is that? Something you should. Read. He unfolded it carefully while Melissa leaned closer beside him. The color drained from both their faces almost instantly. It was a formal notice from our attorney confirming that all property access, financial permissions, and future authority requests connected to Elaine or me had been legally frozen pending investigation. Daniel looked up sharply. You hired a lawyer? Yesterday morning. Melissa stared at me differently now. Not like an old man confused by family conflict. Like somebody she had completely underestimated. Then I calmly reached into my jacket one more time and placed a small flash drive beside the paperwork. And tomorrow, I said quietly, Elaine is going to watch the restored security footage with me for the first time. Daniel's entire face changed. Because whatever was on that footage, he already knew his mother had never seen all of it. The next afternoon, Elaine and I sat together in the den while rain clouds rolled slowly over Cedar Rapids outside the windows. Leon had transferred the restored security footage onto the flash drive the night before, along with timestamps and backup logs showing exactly when files had been deleted from the system. Everything was organized carefully. Clear. Real. I connected the drive to the television while Elaine sat wrapped in a blanket on the couch, holding a cup of untouched tea between both hands. Neither of us spoke much. There was nothing left to speculate about anymore. Only facts. I pressed play. The footage began with ordinary clips from the previous month. Empty hallways. Porch lights flickering on at dusk. Delivery trucks. Then the timestamps shifted toward the nights Daniel and Melissa had visited while I was away. The first clip showed Melissa entering through the back door carrying folders at 11:42 p.m. No knocking. No hesitation. The second clip hit harder. Elaine watched herself sitting at the kitchen table while Melissa spread paperwork across the surface. There was no audio, but body language said enough. Melissa pointing repeatedly at forms. Elaine rubbing her forehead. Daniel pacing behind her. At one point, Elaine visibly pushed papers away from herself. Melissa slid them back. I glanced toward my wife quietly. Tears were already rolling down her face. I did not remember it being like that, she whispered. Then came the footage Daniel had been trying hardest to erase. Timestamp, 2:13 a.m. Melissa entered alone carrying another stack of papers and what looked like prescription bottles from the kitchen cabinet. She sat beside Elaine for nearly 40 minutes while my wife cried into both hands. Then Daniel arrived later through the garage entrance. He looked angry. Not violent. Just frustrated. Agitated. He pointed toward the paperwork repeatedly, while Melissa spoke to Elaine with slow, deliberate gestures, like somebody trying to wear another person down emotionally. Finally, Elaine covered her face completely and stopped responding. Daniel leaned against the counter looking exhausted, while Melissa calmly continued arranging documents in front of her. Nobody spoke in the den for a long time after the footage ended. The grandfather clock ticked softly near the hallway. Outside, rain tapped against the gutters. Elaine finally whispered. They kept saying they were trying to help me prepare. I sat beside her quietly. Prepare for what? Her eyes looked hollow now. For losing you. That sentence settled heavily between us. Not because I believed she truly wanted control handed away from us, but because I finally understood how deeply fear had been fed into her while I was gone. They had not pressured her all at once. They had done it slowly, repeatedly, night after night. By evening, Daniel called again. This time I answered immediately. Dad, he sounded tired. Older somehow. Mom watched the footage. I know. Silence. Then, can I come over? I looked toward Elaine. She stared quietly at the television screen for several seconds before nodding once. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later without Melissa. That alone told me something had changed already. He stepped into the den slowly and froze when he saw the paused footage still visible on the television. Nobody invited him to sit down. Finally, he looked at his mother. Mom. Elaine interrupted him softly before he could continue. Why did you keep coming here at night? Daniel looked, devastated hearing that question from her directly. We thought you needed help. No, she whispered. You thought I would stop trusting myself if you repeated it enough. He opened his mouth, but could not answer. I stood quietly near the fireplace, watching my son struggle to face the reality of what he had participated in. Finally, I said calmly, here is what happens now. No more paperwork. No more access to our finances. No more entering this house without permission. Daniel nodded slowly without arguing. Okay. And Melissa is no longer welcome here. That one hit him harder. Dad, this is not punishment, I said quietly. This is a boundary. He looked down at the carpet for several long seconds before asking the question I think terrified him most. Are you going to press charges? I answered honestly. I do not know yet. Elaine suddenly spoke up from the couch, her voice shaking slightly. I just want my family back. That sentence broke something inside the room because nobody knew how to answer it. Daniel looked close to tears for the first time since this all began. But some damage does not disappear just because truth finally arrives. As he stood near the front door preparing to leave, he turned back toward us slowly and said something neither Elaine nor I expected. Melissa was not the one who started this. The room went completely still. Then Daniel lowered his eyes and whispered, I was. The strangest part about rebuilding your life is how quiet it feels after the chaos finally stops. No dramatic music. No sudden moment where everything becomes perfect again. Just small things returning slowly. Normal things. A month after that conversation in our den, the locks on the house had been changed. The legal freeze remained in place. Melissa stopped contacting us completely after our attorney formally requested no further communication outside documented channels. Daniel came by twice during those first weeks, always alone, always quieter than before. Sometimes he helped fix little things around the house without being asked. Once he repaired the loose porch railing in complete silence while Elaine watched from the kitchen window, holding a cup of tea. Nobody pretended things were magically healed. They were not. Some damage leaves marks that stay even after the bleeding stops. But at least the truth was no longer hiding in the walls of our home. And honestly, that alone changed everything. Elaine slowly started becoming herself again. Not overnight. Healing never works that way. But little by little, the woman I remembered began returning. She started sleeping through the night again. Started cooking real meals instead of opening canned soup. One Saturday morning I walked outside and found her refilling the bird feeders for the first time in months, while sunlight came through the maple trees in the backyard. She looked up at me and smiled softly. A real smile this time. Not forced. Not frightened. Just tired and real and alive. I think that was the moment I finally understood we were going to be okay. Work at Miller Freight became permanent by the end of summer. Gary handed me an official supervisor badge during a staff meeting while half the warehouse clapped and whistled like idiots. I laughed harder than I had in years. Funny thing is, I spent so much of my life believing my worth only came from sacrificing myself for everybody else that I forgot something important. Providing for people does not mean disappearing for them. And loving your family does not mean surrendering your voice inside your own life. Daniel and I still speak now, though differently than before. More carefully, more honestly. One afternoon, he sat across from me at the same diner off Highway 151 and quietly admitted something I think had been eating him alive for years. "I thought if I took control first," he said, staring down into his coffee, "then nothing bad could happen to Mom." I looked at him for a long moment before answering. Control and protection are not the same thing. He nodded slowly, like somebody finally understanding a lesson too late. "I do not hate my son. I never will. But forgiveness and trust are not identical things." That was another lesson this experience taught me. Some boundaries are not punishments. Sometimes they are the only way healing becomes possible. These days, Elaine and I spend more evenings sitting quietly on the back porch watching Iowa sunsets roll across the fields behind our neighborhood. Sometimes we talk. Sometimes we do not. There is comfort in that now. Peace does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it sounds like crickets at dusk and coffee cups settling onto an old wooden table while two people simply breathe easier again. If you are listening to this story right now while carrying your own kind of betrayal, your own confusion, your own exhaustion from trying to hold a family together alone, I need you to hear me clearly. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Protect your finances. Protect your peace. Protect your voice. And do not let guilt convince you that setting boundaries makes you cruel. It does not. The people who truly love you will never need you weakened in order to feel strong themselves. I also learned something else during all of this. Fear grows best in silence. That is why honest conversations matter. That is why documentation matters. That is why asking questions matters, even when people try to make you feel difficult for asking them. God gives us instincts for a reason. Sometimes the quiet voice inside your chest notices danger long before your mind catches up to it. My name is Rick Lawson. I am 71 years old, and the lesson I want to leave with you is this. Never hand away your peace just because somebody else calls it love. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. Truly, the world feels heavy for a lot of people right now, and sometimes hearing another person survive something painful reminds us we are not as alone as we thought. If this story stayed with you tonight, I would genuinely love to hear where you are listening from and what part touched you most. And if you know somebody carrying silent hurt inside their own family, maybe share this story with them too. Sometimes one honest story can reach somebody at exactly the moment they need it most. And if you are staying up a little longer tonight, there are more stories waiting in this playlist. More families, more secrets, more moments where ordinary people discover strength they did not know they still had. Some endings are painful, some are hopeful, but every single one reminds us how deeply human beings need truth, dignity, and connection. So wherever you are tonight, pour yourself a coffee, settle in, and I will meet you in the next story.